Hello, and thank you for joining me on this video. I've titled it So You Don't Believe in God, um, for a reason that I continually see people making comments or talking to me about, well, you can't prove 100% that God exists. And technically, that's true. I think that the only way you could prove that God exists is if you're standing before God or He does something such that it is beyond our understanding, like that something miraculous happens and you're like, okay, so that's something that, a sign or something like that. But I think for everybody there is a threshold of probability: low probability, average probability, and high probability of something to be true. I also think that there's an aspect to this question, and I want to try to keep this conversation as emotionally detached as I can. It's not to criticize people or to make you feel like I don't understand where you're coming from. Um, because I know that faith, regardless of what your faith is or your worldview, is something that is very personal. It's something that is at the heart of everyone of us. That it's how we see the world, it's how we interact. It's how we conduct our lives in society, and so it can be a very emotional and very heated topic, and I want to try and stay away from that as much as I can, because I think that it's important when we talk about belief that regardless of what I believe or what you believe, it doesn't really change reality. And what I mean by that, especially in this context, is everybody in the whole world, almost 8 billion people, could believe strongly that God exists. But if the reality is that God doesn't exist, no amount of faith, no amount of belief is going to spontaneously produce God into existence. It's definitely going to affect how we conduct our lives amongst each other. But when we die, we die. And holding to an image or a set of rules or standards that we believe that God wants us to live by, but God not actually existing, isn't much hope um, either. And so um, and so I think we need to recognize that, and the reverse is true. Everybody could in the world could believe that God doesn't exist, but if God does, our beliefs don't impact his existence. He either exists or he doesn't. And I think this is an important point to be made, because we can keep this conversation philosophical. You could say, well, I believe God doesn't. I could say, I believe God does. Or if you believe, you could say, well, I believe God is this, or is like this, or would do this, or different things. We can have these types of conversations. But we neither define God's existence, whether he exists or he doesn't, and we don't define his character. Who God has, is who he is. Our beliefs, what we think God is like, what we say God is like, has zero relevance on the actual character of God, should he exist. And I think this is quite humbling uh, from our standpoint, because we can't change that reality, whatever it is. And so I think that's where I want to begin with making that point. So technically, I'm not here to prove 100% that God exists, and I'm also not here to share my particular belief in God or what I think God is like. What I'm going to do is give a presentation of why I believe based on evidence that you can verify. I'm going to share with you what this video is and what this video isn't, and keep it as narrowly focused as I can. I found that there are three main reasons that people don't believe. First, poor answers. I know that we all have a lot of questions, and I think that when we go to trusted religious people, priests, pastors, ministers, other Christians, you know, or other people of faith, and we get poor answers about life after death or heaven and hell, or why we should, not have sex before marriage, or whatever it is, that we get poor answers, or we see poor examples of Christians or other religious people who have faith in Jesus or faith in God. Or the second, they were forced to go to church or forced into the religion, and as an adult found no foundation for the faith and rejected. They see no use for it. Maybe they believe it's a bunch of fairy tales, or like it's that it's restrictive. It do this, don't do that. Pray, go to church, read the Bible. Whatever it is. But just to be clear, I'm speaking about this topic from a Christian point of view. Not all faith. That would be way too much of a video. And so this is strictly, and it'll make sense as I go along why from the Christian perspective, as opposed to encompassing all faiths that believe in the existence of God. The third reason sometimes is that you've had a personal terrible tragedy that's happened in your life. And maybe at that moment you've prayed to God, if God is out there, please heal this person, please save this person from dying, or it's had to involve a child or something like that. And you've seen this tragedy unfold, and the idea of a loving God allowing this to happen just simply can't be understood. And so the idea of God and his existence is completely rejected. And to be honest, like I've had challenging times in my life, and I know today that I can't explain why things happen the way that they do, but if they did happen, for me, wouldn't shake my faith. I know that there are things all over the world that happen that I can't explain, that I can't understand. That's essentially my position in the hierarchy between myself and God. I am a finite, limited, and when human being, and when you understand the limits of my knowledge, I can't see the future. I can't cause worst end, or people to not die, or heal diseases, and those types of things. And so I recognize my frailty and my finiteness, my lack of ability to play God, to be God. And that's essentially, the position that I'm in. And so I know it's not a great answer for those who have experienced this, to say that, well, God sees all, he knows all. There's a reason for this, there's a higher purpose for it. But I hope that it may be a little bit more, I guess it's a better answer to just saying, you know what, I don't know. Maybe it's a worse answer. I don't know. But that is definitely a hard one for me to if when people have questions about this type of thing, like why would God allow these types of things. That is something that I do struggle with it. Like I said, it doesn't affect my faith, but it's something that I don't have answers for, and I don't really have a good response, except that I still have to trust God in the things that happen, and to understand that He doesn't see death the same way we do. Uh, Anyways, we'll get into that later on, but those are kind of the three reasons. What this presentation is not. This presentation is not a declaration that the world is 10,000 years old or 6,000 years old or anything like that. This presentation is not a declaration that every word of the Bible is true or accurate or without contradictions or without errors. This presentation is not a declaration that evolution is false or that creation is true. This presentation is not a declaration that the LGBTQ plus movement is immoral. This presentation is not a declaration on the current social, health or climate issues. This presentation is not a political, social, economic, health, racial, or any other stance associated with religious faith today. What this presentation is about is whether Jesus proves He is God and that we should put our faith and trust in Him. That's it. If you are a believer in Jesus Christ as your Savior and Lord, then that's all that matters. That is all that I am trying to provide evidence for. We can debate and discuss and, frankly, totally disagree on the other issues. This is what this presentation is about. So did He provide us evidence that we can bank on and trust to put our faith in Him that we can see today? See, the question isn't whether Jesus of Nazareth existed as a person 2,000 years ago. It's not. It's whether He's God or not. Here's some literary references on whether Jesus was a historical figure who actually lived for people who don't believe He's God. The Jesus Legend, a case for historical reliability of the Synoptic Jesus tradition by Paul Rhodes, Eddie and Gregory A. Boyd. Jesus, Evidence and Argument or Mythicist Myths by Maurice Casey, and Jesus in the Talmud by Peter Schaeffer. There's also here a clip from Dr. Bart Ehrman.
I do not see evidence in archaeology or history for historical Jesus.
Yeah, well, I do. I mean, that's why I wrote the book. Well, I mean, okay, yeah. I mean, I have a whole book on it. I mean, so there is a lot of evidence. I mean, there is so much evidence that it is not. I mean, I know in the crowds you all run around with, it's commonly thought that Jesus did not exist. Let me tell you, once you get outside of your conclave, there's nobody who. I mean, this is not even an issue for scholars of antiquity. It is not an issue for scholars. There is no scholar in any college or university in the Western world who teaches classics, ancient history, New Testament, early Christianity, any related field who doubts that Jesus existed. Now, that is not evidence. That is not evidence. Just because everybody thinks so doesn't make it evidence. But if you want to know about the theory of evolution versus the theory of creationism, and every scholar in every reputable institution in the world believes in evolution, it may not be evidence, but if you've got a different opinion, you better have a pretty good piece of evidence yourself. The reason for thinking Jesus existed is because He is abundantly attested in early sources. That's why. And I give the details in my book. Early and independent sources indicate that certainly that Jesus existed. One author that we know about knew Jesus' brother and knew Jesus' closest disciple, Peter. He's an eyewitness to both Jesus' closest disciple and his brother. So, I mean, I'm sorry, but again, I respect your disbelief, but I if you want to go where the evidence goes, I think that atheists have done themselves a disservice by jumping on the bandwagon of mythicism, because, frankly, it makes you look foolish to the outside world. If that's what you're going to believe, you just look foolish. You are much better off going with historical evidence and arguing historically rather than coming up with a theory that Jesus didn't exist. Sorry.
So there's just one. It's one professor's opinion who's not a Christian, who's not a believer in Jesus, to say that there's ample evidence. And I'm not here to get into that evidence. Like I said, here's some books that are written that are not done by Christians or from a Christian perspective that detail that the evidence that does exist for Jesus of Nazareth, the person existing in history. If you reject the Bible, that's okay. I'm not here to say that every word in the Bible is accurate, is without error, without contradiction. I'm not here to defend. It's what, 1,000-page collection of books and letters and documents. So I'm not here to defend every word. What I am going to do is use one particular chapter in the Bible, Matthew 24. I'll use other verses and chapters, but all I want you to ask yourself is this a rational, logical explanation of the passage? You may not believe in the meaning or the interpretation or the understanding of what Jesus said, but we do have the document of the book of Matthew and divided into common or into modern terms into chapters and verses. And in Matthew 24, Jesus talks about the future. And so if we can acknowledge that, yes, this document does exist, that these words were written, whether it's Jesus's actual words, that's, it's more so that this document that gives credit to this Jesus of Nazareth as saying these things exists. It still makes the claims in the Bible that we can either verify or disprove. If the text is appropriately used, then we can see if the claim is valid and if it's a reasonable conclusion. It's like if you saw a sale flyer and saw a toaster priced at $4,000. Your experience may tell you that it was a typo, a misprint. You probably conclude that the decimal was missing and it should read $40. No conspiracy or deception. We're simply going to look and see if the passage makes reasonable sense as it's written. So is Jesus who he claimed to be? Well, first we need to know what were his claims. In the Bible, Jesus claimed to be the same as God the Father. There are many discussions, and Bart Ehrman has debated on this, where John, the book of John, was the last of the Gospels written. And it's written different. There's many of the I am verses in there. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. I and the Father are one. Those types of things. And where those phrases are not found in the other Gospels. But what is found in the other Gospels is the claims that Jesus spoke as the authority of God. For example, there's one where Jesus talks about that he has the authority over the Sabbath. Well, we know that God in the Ten Commandments gave to Moses, that's the biblical historical account, that gave Moses the Ten Commandments, and in those Ten Commandments that there's that you should observe the Sabbath. So for Jesus, I believe that's in Mark, that he talks about that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. That is definitely, to me, even though he's not coming out and saying that he is God, I'm God, worship me. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the authority that Jesus takes. And so here in Mark chapter 14, verses 60 to 64, it says, Then the high priest stood up before the others and asked Jesus, Well, aren't you going to answer these charges? What do you have to say for yourself?" But Jesus was silent, made no reply. Then the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus said, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming in the clouds of heaven." The high priest tore his clothes, showed his horror, and said, "Why do we need other witnesses? You have all heard this blasphemy. What is your verdict?" "Guilty," they replied. He cried, "He deserves to die." And there's passages in Matthew 26 and Luke 22. And so here, and then Jesus in John 10 compares himself to God, like I said, as well. But also, there's also a logical standpoint from it in the Old Testament, in the Jewish Bible. We call the Old Testament here in the West. Prophets and different people would always say, the word of the Lord has come to me, or thus saith the Lord, or and they would make it clear within the text, within their proclamation or their message, that they were simply a messenger from God, that God spoke to them. They were just repeating it, and that they would never say this was from their own knowledge, from their own understanding. It was always, this is what God is saying, and they were the messenger. Jesus, however, his language is different. He talks about, things like, "You have heard this about, about God, about the Father, about, how you should live," or whatever. "I tell you." And he claims that authority throughout the scriptures, regardless of which books of the gospel you read, that he now is claiming that he is the authority to tell people how they should live, and what it means, what the scriptures mean. Here is another video. Oh, give me a second here. We can just kind of look at.
No, light it on fire!
Who's he quoting? He's quoting Exodus 3:14, the burning bush. Remember when God appeared to Charlton Heston? I just want to know, from the Bible perspective, why isn't there a unambiguous, unequivocal statement that where Jesus says, "I'm God, he's to worship me"? Well, he did. Where's that statement in the Bible? It's in John 8:58, where he said, "Before Abraham was born, I am." That's why they picked up stones to stone him, because they knew he was claiming to be God. What's that a quote from? "I am." Who's he quoting? He's quoting Exodus 3:14, the burning bush. Remember when God appeared to Charlton Heston? Moses says to Yahweh, "Who should I tell the Israelites you are?" And Yahweh says, "Tell them I am sent you." What does I am mean? I am means the self-existent eternal one, the being that had no beginning, the being that would have no end. So that's who Jesus is claiming to be. That's why they decided that they needed to stone him. In fact, I always ask people, for people who don't believe Jesus was God, I say, well, why did they kill him? I mean, did he get killed for saying love your neighbor? Does that get you killed? Love your neighbor. You must die. No, that doesn't get you killed. You get killed for claiming to be God because it's sedition to the Romans and it's blasphemy to the Jews. Who's he quoting?
And that's kind of the what we're showing here, right? Is that in this Mark 14 passage is when Jesus is questioned, and in horror they said, "Do we need any other witnesses? You have all heard this blasphemy." What is blasphemy? Him claiming to be God, claiming to have the authority of God. It isn't that he's claiming to be the messenger of God, or to say, what, these are the things that God has told me. It's because that he is saying he is God. He's taking that authority. So either Jesus is God in the flesh, or he isn't. And this has been talked about by Christians. This argument. I think Josh McDowell is the one who first talked about it. He's either a liar because he claims to be God and knows he's not, or he's a lunatic because he believes he's God but isn't, or he's God. there's really no other conclusion that we can come to, because Jesus makes this claim, and either he's crazy and he's saying I'm God, and he thinks he is, but he's not, or he's a liar because he's claiming to be God and he knows he's not, or he is. And so here it says that, just like I said, Matthew 16, it talks about, who do people say that Jesus was, and they say, well, he's Elijah, or John the Baptist, or one of the prophets, or, and then Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus replied, you are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You did not learn this from any human being. And I think that that's the question here is, it doesn't matter who I say that he is, it's who do you say that he is? Who is he to you? And when we have this conversation about Jesus, so we've got this guy, he existed, history tells us that. We've got record that he made the claims that he was God, and people today believe that he is, and they put their trust and faith in him. But when you talk about it, we are 2,000 years removed from Jesus's life. He lived in the first century in Israel, and often when Christians talk about it, they talk about, well, we believe in, that Jesus rose from the dead 2,000 years ago. We believe that he died on a cross to save people from their sins, 2,000 years ago. And we often look that far back for evidence to believe. Using that type of information from long ago for me is great to learn about as a Christian, to just have evidence upon evidence and see, but it's also very difficult for me to believe because essentially we can't say, even if we knew for sure that there was an empty tomb, that was Jesus's tomb. It doesn't prove that he rose from the dead. It proves that his body isn't there. It doesn't prove that somebody took the body. It doesn't prove that somebody took it out of there, moved it somewhere else. He's buried somewhere else afterwards. It does. It would show, what it would prove is that, okay, so we have his tomb and it's empty. Not that there was some miracle surrounding it. And to me, if Jesus is God, then wouldn't his claims be able to be verified today, instead of saying to somebody who doesn't believe, well, you just need to accept it as a matter of faith? I'm just not that type of person. And what bothers me the most is that Christians expect people to accept that a guy who lived 2,000 years ago is the savior of the world and of their souls based on faith. And again, once you believe, if I said, okay, I believe in Jesus for whatever reason, maybe things have happened in my life, whatever it is, but I have this conversion moment. And then somebody says, well, here's some evidence, here's some logical reasoning, here's that he lived, that he died, that we can discuss, the logistics or logicalness of the resurrection, as far as like the empty tomb and the Roman guards were guarding it, and that kind of thing. But I don't want my belief to be something that I'm expected to believe blindly, and I don't want to tell others that they have to accept it blindly either. And I'm not an expert in archaeology or history. So I asked myself, okay, so did Jesus make any more claims that we can examine today? And in fact, he did. In fact, when I wasn't a believer in Jesus, I tried to find the faults, the inconsistencies. I tried to cause people who believed in Christianity to stumble, to stump them. And I enjoyed that for a time. And when I heard this, I found that Jesus made the most extraordinary, outrageous, insane claim, and that was he could tell us the future. See, I thought I had hit the mother lode of crazy on this. I thought Christians actually believe that Jesus is going to return one day, which, again, was crazy to me. But that I found that Jesus claimed he could actually predict the future and that one day he would return as king of the earth. And that was something I hadn't heard before. I'd heard that Christians believe that Jesus was going to come back one day, but I didn't realize that there was any biblical belief surrounding this idea. Just that I don't know what I'd heard it in some hymns, and I just kind of heard about the idea, but I didn't realize that there was so many claims that Jesus made. And um so we have to look at, so I want to focus on this video, this claim that he could tell us the future. And so we have 2,000 years of history to look back, and surely there's got to be some way to verify or disprove his claims. This is what my presentation is about, is that he claims that he can predict the future, and is there any rational, logical evidence to his claims? And hopefully I can share in a clear way why I believe. I believe, and I went from a person who mocked and tried to get Christians to stumble, and I found it some sort of victory when I could outsmart them or cause them to stumble, or where they didn't have the answers, and I was like, aha, see, it's just a bunch of blind faith. There's no real evidence to it. And how I became a true believer in Jesus as my Savior, Lord, and King today. And you can decide whether or not you want him to be the same for you, or whether you want to put your trust in him. But my rationale is that if we can see evidence for his claim about the future today, from the words that he spoke 2,000 years ago, for the specific time and history for all these events, then believing that he rose from the dead 2,000 years ago takes a lot less faith. And my faith isn't built on a foundation. It's just one more piece of things that I believe. And there's no inconsistency and there's no conflict for me to say, yeah, I believe in an empty tomb, not because of the evidence that surrounds the empty tomb, but because of Jesus's claims and the evidence that I see for that. Why should you care? Why should it matter whether Jesus has made these other claims about the future? And to me, it's because if his claims about the future have happened, we can verify it, we have evidence, we can take our devices and we can research them. Then what about his other claims? See, I believe in heaven because Jesus speaks of heaven. I believe that Jesus is the only way to heaven because that's the claim that he made. And if he can prove that he is God by his claims about the future, then I believe that his claims about how to get to heaven, which is through him, is legitimate. And his claim that he will save us. And this is what I want. This is why Christianity for me is different than any other religion. Any other religion says that God exists, or there's some goal that you're trying to achieve, some heaven, nirvana, some paradise you're trying to get to. And every day you need to do certain things. You need to balance the scales. You need to have more good on your side than bad. And a lot of us would look at ourselves and say, well, we're pretty good people. But if we look at the world today, and humanity is kind of in charge of what goes on the earth, political, societal, environmental, do we feel like humanity is generally good? Right now, we're at war. Different countries are at war. Right now, we have uh, we our greed, not specifically you and I, but our leaders or different people who control economics and the economy, because of the greed in their policies, we're suffering with record inflation. We're suffering from food shortages. Those are all human results of human activity. And so in the Bible, it says, that we are corrupt, um, and our hearts are deceitfully wicked, that we are selfish, that we are arrogant. But God loves us. He loves you wherever you're at, whoever you are, whatever you've done. He loves you. And he gave his only begotten Son, Jesus, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. I read that and I wonder how many times people listen to me or listen to other Christians and say that's all they are, is that we're here to condemn other people. If you don't believe we're here to condemn you, we're here to tell you that you're going to hell. You have to believe, you have to do this, you have to live this way, you have to love this type of person, you have to go to this type of church, you have to, whatever it is. And if you don't, you're going to hell, and we condemn you. But that's not why Jesus came. He didn't come to condemn the world. He came to save it. So, did Jesus predict the future? And like I said, the great thing about this is that you can totally disagree with me. You can shut this video off at any time. You can say this guy is an idiot and move on with your life. You get to decide for yourself. I am simply here to share about my background as a non-believer and how I became a true believer, and what the evidence that I've discovered of why I believe what I believe. You can disagree, reject it, ignore it, or not. That's up to you. There are 3 sets of numbers I want you to keep in mind as I go through this. The first one is 1 and 1 to the 50th power. That's 1 with 50 zeros behind it. If you look this up on the internet, scientists kind of use this number as the probability of being statistically impossible. So if something is statistically impossible, it's got a 1 in 1 to the 50th power or greater chance of happening. You've got 1 to the 80th power, which is the estimated number of atoms in the known universe. And then 1 in 1 to the 157th power. That is the probability of 48 specific events being predicted in advance happening in one lifespan. And where I get this information from is this, the statistical probability of Jesus fulfilling messianic prophecies. Now, this book that's referenced, it's by, let me just see here, Peter Stoner. He wrote a book called Science Speaks, I think in the 50s. And what he did was that he applied probability to the messianic prophecies of the Old Testament and how Jesus fulfilled them. So it says here that according to one calculation, there are 332 messianic prophecies from the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, which Jesus fulfilled, and you can find them in the New Testament. And and then we've got the Dead Sea Scrolls to show that the reference that the messianic prophecies existed about 100 years before the birth of Jesus, so that they were, so that it's not later additions that, oh, Jesus was born here or he lived here or he did this, and then to add it in later on as fulfilled prophecy. We have documentation showing that. But what I want to use is this same mathematical premise that Professor Stoner used in his book to talk about events today, or events that the predictions of the future. So not the prophecies of the past relating to the Messiah in the Jewish Bible, or the Hebrew Bible, but that Jesus's predictions about the future and what are the chances. So here it talks about if you had 8 prophecies that happened in one lifespan, the odds would be 1 to the 10 to the power of 17. That's 1 with 17 zeros behind it, and you can see the chance of winning the mega billion jackpot or whatever here. But Stoner went on to calculate the probability of one person fulfilling 48 prophecies in one lifespan is 1 in 10 to the 157th power. And it says, in case you're questioning whether Peter Stoner's math was wrong, Harold Hartzler, PhD of the American Scientific Affiliation, Goshen College, writes in the foreword of Stoner's book, the manuscript of science speaks has been carefully reviewed by a committee of the American Scientific Affiliation members and by the executive council of the same group has been found in general to be dependable and accurate in regard to the scientific material presented. The mathematical analysis included is based upon principles of probability and are thoroughly sound, and Professor Stoner has applied these principles in a proper and convincing way. So that is the math of what I'm talking about here, is that what if Jesus and the Bible have predicted 48 specific events for a specific period of one lifespan, that the odds of probability of happening are 1 in 1 to the 157. That's 1 with 157 zeros behind it. And here is a list of 50 different, and you can pause the video, go through it. I'm not going to cover all 50, but you get the idea that there are some specific. There's going to be some geopolitical ones. There's going to be some specific to the Jewish people in Israel. There's going to be some societal, prophecies. It's all, there's a wide spectrum, but I'll cover some of these so that you can see for yourself how these things have been foretold and predicted to happen. So again, just covering that article, this isn't limited to, the Bible isn't limited to just the 50. In fact, many scholars believe that there are about 500 specific prophecies regarding the future in the biblical timeline. Not all of it is our future, but from the future of when the last ones were written. And like I said, I'm only taking one chapter out of the Bible. There are entire books or sections in the Bible that talk about future and events to come. So I'm only dealing with one particular chapter. So whenever we deal with predictions or prophecy or the future, the main question is when. So if I say to you, okay, this is going to happen, your first question is, okay, when is it going to happen? So that we can see how accurate that prediction is. If I just leave it open-ended, well, anything could happen at any random point in time, and that doesn't make it a miraculous prediction. And so in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus is asked when these things are going to happen. And so it says, now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be? Right? First question out of their mouth, when? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? This passage is about the future, and scholars and Bible experts date the book of Matthew to be written between 70 to 110 AD, or Common Era, which is commonly used now. The reason for this is that by 136 AD, the Jewish people had been driven out of the land of Israel. The wars with the Romans between 66 and 136 AD caused the temple to be destroyed in 70 AD. So the temple and the city of Jerusalem was destroyed, and then eventually all the Jewish people have been driven out of the land of Israel by 136. And so when we're looking at the timing of of the book of Matthew. That's why it's between 70 and 110 AD. What some Christians say is that those prophecies have already been fulfilled. Except when we look at Matthew 24, it talks about, and I'll get into the specific points of this, but when wars, there wasn't an empire war between the Romans and another empire, which is what Jesus talks about, the empires that go to war. Nobody believed that those wars were the end of the world, and so there's some things that why I believe that there are many things that weren't fulfilled back in 70 AD or around that time in the first century, but apply to a later date. And there's questions about, okay, well, why did some of the apostles believe, particularly Paul, that Jesus could return in his lifetime? Well, because during his life, the conditions of what Jesus predicted existed. There was a temple in Jerusalem. There were Jewish people in the land of Israel, and these types of things. But when these wars were over, nothing about Jesus' predictions in Matthew 24 existed. There was no Jerusalem. There were no Jews in Judea, etc. Jesus in Matthew 24:32 says something interesting, though. He says, "Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and put forth leaves, you know that summer is near." And what's interesting is that nowhere in that chapter of Matthew 24 is there another reference of the fig tree. It just kind of seems to come out of nowhere, but yet Jesus has now learned the parable of the fig tree. So it's we have to question, okay, is this just a random phrase, or is there more to it? We know that in the day of Jesus, there was only the Old Testament. There was no New Testament. The Gospels and letters of Paul hadn't been written. Those came later. So what they only had to reference was what we would call the Old Testament today. And so the logical thing to do is to say, okay, is there any other mention of a fig tree in the Old Testament? Is there some sort of connection that we can make to this phrase that Jesus is talking about and gain some insight? And again, remember, you don't have to believe the words of the claim. Just have to ask yourself, is this a reasonable, rational, logical understanding of the text? So what is the fig tree? In the Old Testament, we can do a search for the phrase fig tree or figs. For example, in Hosea 9:10, it says, "I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your forefathers as the first fruits on the fig tree in the first season." In Deuteronomy 8:7-8, it says, "For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land." This is the promised land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs that flow out of the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey. In Jeremiah 24:3-8, it talks about figs. The Lord said to me, "What do you see, Jeremiah?" And I said, "Figs, the good figs very good, and the bad figs very bad, which cannot be eaten, so they are so bad." Again, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, like these good figs, so I will acknowledge those who are carried away captive from Judah, whom I have set out of this place for their own good into the land of the Chaldeans. For I will set my eyes on them for good, and I will bring them back to this land, the promised land of Israel. I will build them up and not pull them down. I will plant them and not pluck them up. Then I will give them a heart to know me, and that I am the Lord. They shall be my people, and I will be their God, for they shall return to me with their whole heart. And as the bad figs which cannot be eaten, they are so bad, surely thus says the Lord. So I will give up Zedekiah, the king of Judah, his princes, the residue of Jerusalem, who remain in the land, and those who dwell in the land of Egypt." And so here you can see that the fig trees or figs are talking about the Jewish people and their connection to the promised land of Israel. Every Old Testament reference, and there's 36 of them, has three components: the promised land of Israel, the Jewish people, and they are either entering the land, in the land, being expelled from the land, or returning to the land. And there's other biblical references listed here that you can look up as well. So when Jesus is asked, when will these things happen? He doesn't right away go into answering the when. But if we apply this to Matthew 24:32, it says, learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branches has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. In essence, Jesus is saying, learn the parable of the fig tree. When the Jewish people are in the promised land of Israel, when they come back, when they seem to be dead, like a tree is in the winter, and they come into the land and it starts to bloom, put forth leaves, we know that summer is near. This is reference to summer being near, telling us the bloom takes place in spring after winter where the tree seems dead. For the 1800 plus years, the Jewish people were not in the promised land of Israel. It seemed like they would never return to the land. They were scattered all over the world, but on May 14th, 1948, Israel was reborn as a nation, and the Jewish people returned to the promised land, and they are continuing to do so even today. And so it says in Matthew 24:33, the next verse, so you too, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Jesus is saying, when the Jews return to the promised land of Israel, it will be spring, but soon summer will come, just like when we see this event happen. His return isn't immediate, but it's near. It's something to look forward to. And what he says is between the time that the Jewish people return to the promised land until he returns, all of these things, all the things mentioned in the entire chapter of Matthew 24 will take place. And then in verse 34, he says, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until, again, all these things take place. Many debate the term generation. What does it mean? Is it 120 years? Is it 40 years? Is it 80 years? They want to put an amount of years to it. The simplest understanding for me is that this generation will not pass away until all these things. That means that from event number 1, the Jews returning to the land of Israel, promised land of Israel, to event number 2, which is the return of Jesus, it's got a specific period of time, but it's simply one lifespan. Those who have seen the event in 1948 will not all die off, will all not pass away until event number 2 is completed. On May 14th, 1948, Israel was born as a nation and the Jewish people returned to the Promised Land. That was event number 1. We are almost at the 74th anniversary of that date. We're coming up on it in a couple weeks here. The question is, how much longer does a 73-year-old, almost 74-year-old have until they pass away? Maybe it is 20 years, maybe it is 30 years, but we have a specific time frame, one lifespan. Now we have to look at the other things of all of these other predictions that Jesus made and see if they're happening within this one lifespan. So we have the when. Whether you agree with the conclusion, what verifies this understanding is if we can see all the other things happening. So if I say, well, this is the claim. The claim is that when the Jewish people returned to the Promised Land, which after 1800 years happened on May 14th, 1948, and that those people who saw that event will not all pass away before all these things take place, that is the parameters. And so then you have to look, and there are different passages in the Bible that even make it more specific. So it breaks down this lifespan into a final year of 7 years. And then within that 7 years, a final year of 3.5 years. And specific prophecies happen within the first 3.5 years of that 7 years, and the last 3.5 of that 7 years. And then it says that after that 7-year period, right at the immediately following that 7-year period, Jesus returns. That's what the Bible's claim. So it breaks this one lifespan even further down in different passages, but we're not going to get into that today. But what I find interesting is that is that we have been told that the world could be coming to an end. We have many Hollywood movies, from asteroid collisions to climate change to nuclear war, whatever, or nuclear weapons, and just whatever that dystopian apocalyptic movies, about world ending. Scientists warn climate change is a species, a threat to our species, to a threat to life on our planet. You've got Elon Musk and other people warning of AI, that what happens when AI is able to take over its development and continually get smarter and smarter. We have wars, we have asteroids, we have famines, we have pandemics, and all of these things, could be the end of humanity. But yet, when I talk about, well, Jesus said, in this one lifespan, there's things that are going to happen that's going to feel like the end of the world is here. People laugh, people mock, and it's like, well, we're not just, Christians aren't the only one who believe that we're living in a time where these things could come to pass. And I wonder what the odds are. At the time that Jesus said we'd think the world was ending, we'd believe that the world might end, and that we might destroy ourselves, even as non-believers in Jesus, that people would also believe that as possibility. And what is interesting is that when you look at why Jesus says that he's going to come back, so let's just take a look at Matthew 24. Okay, here in 21, Jesus says, "For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor shall ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, for the chosen sake, those days will be short." What Jesus is saying here is that the reason he returns is because if he doesn't, we would destroy all life on the planet. Again, referencing the existential issues we face today, that is very possible for us to do. I'm not saying this is going to happen in the next year. I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next 5 years. I'm saying that right now we have tech experts, we have science experts, we have different people who are not religious, who are not faith-based, who don't believe in Jesus, saying we might be on a 5 to 10 year path. And now could this even be accelerated if Russia launches a nuclear weapon and we ended up in a nuclear war, or the famines and food shortages become so widespread around the globe that it causes unrest, and that causes maybe wars and war to break out. And so there's all these things that we're seeing right now without having to believe in Jesus or the Bible to say that we could literally destroy ourselves. And Jesus is saying he's going to return before we actually do it. That if he didn't return, we would actually destroy ourselves. That is the crux of this video, is that I find it fascinating that these things are parallel and are lining up. And so if these things are true, then where can we place our hope? See, before I go through the list of events to watch out for, I want you to look at this phrase. Jesus says in Matthew 24, "But all these things are merely the beginning of birth pains." Birth pains, which we call contractions today, is once they start, they don't stop. They increase in frequency and intensity. It'll be the most pain women will ever experience, and it continues right up until the birth of the child. To me, this phrase, this concept, means to me that when things start, they will only get worse once they begin. There may be times of reprieve or where we think, okay, the worst has come, the worst is past, and now things will return to normal, or things will get better, and then something else will come up. And if we notice how 2020 was worse than 2019, and 2021 was worse than 2020, and 2022 will be worse, even though we're kind of exiting the final stage of the pandemic. We're facing record high inflation, we're facing the possibility of nuclear war, we're facing food shortages and food scarcity and all these types of things, economic recession, these kind of things. So 2022 will be worse than 2021, and 2023 will be worse than 2022. And there might be a reprieve for a time, but these things will continue to pick up pace and continue to increase in intensity. That is the claim that Jesus is saying. That wars will get more intense, famines will get more intense, pestilence or pandemics will get more intense, and different things will happen. And once they start, it won't stop. So here are some of the things that Jesus claims about the one lifespan before he returns. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will mislead many people. There are many people who are claiming that they're the Savior, that they're Jesus incarnate, and I think that those things will increase at this point in time. It says, you'll be hearing wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for these things must take place, but the end is not yet. But that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. The word nation that we use, the Greek word means ethnic group. So here we have a war. We have the Russians against the Ukrainians, ethnic group against ethnic group. We have kingdom, the phrase kingdom against kingdom. Or it could be empire. In Daniel 2, it talks about the kingdoms, but it's talking about the Roman Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Grecian Empire, the Persian Empire. And so kingdom against kingdom could be empires or superpowers, we'd call today. Something like the US against Russia, or the US against China, should China invade Taiwan. And so there's this description here but it also says that these wars are not just regular wars. It will alarm people. These wars will alarm people all over the world. They will make people believe that the end is here. But Jesus is saying, see that you're not alarmed. These things must take place, but the end is not yet. And so that's what we need to look at, the phrasing and the understanding. So are there any rumors of wars that are alarming? Yeah, like I said, I mentioned Russia and Ukraine could grow to a much bigger war. We're talking about World War III. What if China, goes after Taiwan? Will the U.S. get involved in that? Iran is moving towards a nuclear bomb and has vowed to wipe Israel off the map. Jesus says famines will come. Currently, China is holding 50% of the world's grain supplies, and we see that food shortages are becoming an issue all over the world. India, I think, is experiencing massive drought and massive food shortages. We see supply chain issues. We're seeing the highest inflation ever affecting our food supplies. Earthquakes, lawlessness, hatred towards others. There will be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places, Jesus says. They will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Christians aren't liked. And I'm not saying that we haven't caused some of those issues ourselves by some of the things that we say and do. But I really think that this is going to grow. Many will be offended, they will betray one another, they will hate one another, there will be many false prophets and rise up and deceive many. And like I said, I think in the days ahead we're going to see more and more of that. Lawlessness will abound and the love of many will grow cold. I could provide examples of these, but we can all see these things happening. We can see here, when we look at, this is from Business Insider, January 6, 2022, 5 places World War III could start in 2022. This Straits Times, Russia propaganda for nuclear weapons used with signal end of humanity, Nobel laureate. This is from an hour ago, and it's currently May 4th, 2022. We have here on April 27, 2022, China suggests attack on Taiwan can't be called an invasion. So we've got that. Uh, United Nations, as of March 18, 2022, says UN warns of global famine, urges end to Russia aggression. Because I think it's something like between Russia and Ukraine, they produce 50% of like the grain in the world or something. Like it's a huge number, so that's going to affect. Uh, Here you've got on May 3rd, 2022, scientists warn that climate change could spark the next major pandemic. We're talking about Christian persecution, 1 in 7 Christian minorities under threat in 2022. This is as of January 20th, 2022. You've got we'll come back to this because this is interesting. And so you've got these things, and then Jesus says in Matthew 24 in verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. You have to remember the context. When Jesus spoke these words, they were on a hillside in Israel with 12 other guys. There was no Christianity at that point. There was no missionaries or global evangelistic effort. So the idea that the whole world would one day hear his message would have been quite absurd in that day. Today, the internet, YouTube, social media allows Jesus' message to go all over the earth, and now it's taking another huge step forward with Elon Musk's Starlink program. And it talks about here something you might be less familiar with is Starlink, a venture that aims to sell internet connections to almost anyone on the planet by way of growing network of private satellites orbiting overhead. His goal is to encompass the Earth so that anywhere in the world you can get high-speed internet access, even in those places that are currently unavailable to get high-speed internet. And so, I think that this might be a situation where, like I said, this prophecy could be fulfilled, but it's definitely at a time where we have the ability. You could be across the world in Australia, and I'm in North America, and you could watch this, or be in the Middle East and watch this. And so that to me is fascinating. It talks about a new temple being rebuilt in Jerusalem, and so that there will be sacrifices again at some point, and because there has to be an end to a sacrifice, and so this has to do with the end time. But the holy place is the temple where sacrifices and offerings are made, and we know that it's a different one because in the beginning of Matthew 24 verses 1 to 2, Jesus talks about that the temple that they were looking at, the second temple, was going to be destroyed. And so, but then in verse 15, he talks about that there will be a new temple, the one that is going to be where some person is going to, or some event is going to happen where it's going to be an abomination in the temple. So there has to be a temple for the abomination that causes the temple to become desolate to happen. And so here we have in Israel Unwired from September 20th, 2019, the third temple is coming, and now you can watch what it's going to look like. They have videos about the plans and all these types of things, but what it's going to look like. They've trained the priests. They have everything in place to build the temple. They just have to build it. And so I believe that that's an event that's going to come in the very near future. There are those who are in Judea. Before 1967, there were no Jews in Judea that could flee to the mountains. There weren't any who there that won't travel on the Sabbath. It talks about, pray that this is not in winter or on the Sabbath, because the Jewish people don't travel on the Sabbath. And so again, this wasn't possible before 1967 because there weren't Jewish people in Judea, which is today called the West Bank. Judea and Samaria is called the West Bank today. If Jesus is God, then he says he will do that. What if we get to the point where we messed this place up, screwed this place up so badly that Jesus, foreseeing this, promised that when it'll get to that point, he would move us to a better place. See, I don't need Jesus' words to tell me that we've messed things up. We've messed this planet up. We've messed our nations up. We've messed our economies up. What I need to know is that this isn't all there is. I need to know that when my life is over, probably by somebody pressing a button and nations going to war, so whatever's going to happen, that there is a better place waiting. The hope that Jesus brings is that even if we struggle, we get sick, we live in a war-torn country, that when our life, which is temporary for all of us, is over, there is a paradise waiting. Jesus, for me, is not the end, but the beginning. Imagine I said to you that you needed to leave your home, your job, your life as you know it because some natural disaster was coming to wipe out your entire town and your life where you lived. That'd be terrible, right? But what if I said I could move you to somewhere safe? We'd have a brand new home, a brand new job. I'd move you close to your loved ones where money and danger and stress wouldn't be an issue for you or loved ones going forward. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, that's what the Bible says Jesus will bring when he returns. In Revelation, Jesus destroys evil when he returns. In Revelation 19. In Revelation 21, it says, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea." Many understand this to be chaos, not oceans or water. Often the imagery of a sea, raging sea, is chaos. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is among the people, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death, there will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away." So here's my conclusion. I don't need 12 specific events to believe. I don't need 48 specific events to believe. I don't need 500 specific things to events. I don't think you need to know those things either. I don't think you need to know what the probabilities or the improbabilities of all these things happening in one lifespan and how unlikely it is to happen. What I think you might need to believe is just to see one or a few of these things where your life is altered in such a way where you wonder, is there any hope? Is there any more? If people, leaders, and other nations can attack other nations or affect our food supply or wipe out our economy or cause us to go to war, and we have no control over that, and we think this is it, then where is the hope? What is there to live for, right? And we might become extremely depressed, extremely disillusioned. But I hope that you'll remember Jesus' words. "See that you're not alarmed, for these things must come to pass. God has not abandoned us. Sure, things might get dark, and they might get really dark. But he has already told us these things will happen, and in that we can rest in his other claims. Like John 14, 1-6, Jesus says, Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions or rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and I receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know." Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going, and how we can know the way." And Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." He is in preparation. He's preparing a place for us so that when we wreck this place, when we destroy it with war, and people en masse pass away because of all the things that we have caused, Jesus has a place that he's prepared for us, that he will take us to. Jesus Christ is the way because he is God. He knows the directions to his home. Jesus Christ is the truth because he has told us all these things will happen. And Jesus Christ is the life because without him we are dead. He brings answers to why we exist and what our purpose is and what happens after we die. If we can see that he predicted the future in such exact detail and the exact specific lifespan that I'm talking about, then who else could do that but God? Then God exists. And if Jesus is God, then his other claims about heaven and things we hope for, like an end to death and disease and war and suffering, are all true. That even if these things happen, they all lead to a bright future. Death is not the end, and there is a hope for us in heaven and a new earth. He says, "Behold, I am making all things new. Write these words, write, for these words are faithful and true." And then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end." This is why he's my God and King. And all we have to do is put our trust in him. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him. I pray that for you. I hope that this video has provided you evidence that whether right now you're a Christian or not, maybe you are afraid of the end of humanity, the end of the world, whatever you want to call it. Maybe in the coming days, things will happen and you will feel that. And you might lose hope. You might say, what is there to hope for if we're just going to destroy this place? And Jesus said these things will happen. We will make decisions to cause these things to happen. As we can already see, they've already begun. Things will get worse. Things will escalate. As much as we want peace, as much as we want life to return to normal, those days aren't coming back. The hatred amongst people, the political animosity, the religious animosity, the societal, the cultural, the issues are all amped up. We're all on edge, and it's a pressure cooker for a lot of people, and things are going to get difficult and continue to get difficult. But the hope is not in people. The hope is not in government. The hope is not wishing life would go back to normal. Our hope is in a God that has said, look, you're going to mess things up. You're going to cause terrible things to happen. You're going to cause... If he doesn't come back, we would cause our own destruction. We would wipe all life off this planet, but he's going to return to save humanity. But when I just pray that, as you think about where's your hope, that you put your trust in him, that you say, look, like me, say, sorry you messed up. We've all screwed up. We've all made mistakes. We've all done stupid things to contribute to this problem, contribute to the way that the world and society is today. All of us. None of us are innocent. None of us are guilt-free. We just say sorry. Screwed up our lives. We've screwed up our marriages. We've screwed up our families. We've screwed up our countries. We've screwed up the world. We're sorry. Please forgive us and save us. That if our lives do end, or when our lives end, that he will take us to the place that he's prepared for us. That's all we have to do, is just put our faith in him. With whatever faith that we have, whoever you are, wherever you're at, wherever you live, whatever you've done, God knows. And he loves you. He made you. And so we don't have to be afraid of him. We don't have to be afraid of him judging us or calling on his wrath to come down on us, because Jesus paid that price on the cross. He willingly died to take the death penalty off the table for us, to pay the price for the screw ups and the things that we've done. And I pray that you would, like I said, I pray that you put your trust in him today. Just cry out to him, call out to him, say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, and save me. So thank you, take care, and I hope this helps.